Hi, welcome to another Friday Afternoons at the Dulwich Centre. Today I'm going to be speaking about working with people who have been subjected to abuse. And the people that I'm meeting with are all women, so that's the experience that I'm going to be speaking of. So I'm thinking about when I'm working with people, I'm thinking about the acts of resistance that they made at the time of the assault or the abuse, and then also the acts of resistance that they're making to the ongoing effects of the abuse. And then also thinking about reclaiming their lives from the effects of abuse. So these are all ideas that are drawn from the work of Michael White and Angel Ewan. I've also been influenced by David Denborough and Shirley Hung Suet Lin in terms of thinking about alternative types of justice, and also thinking about deconstruction in terms of the messages that women, and particularly people who've been abused, are hearing in society. Over the last few years, I've noticed some themes emerging in the work. Women were being referred to our service for issues that they said it was parenting issues, drug use, and also the mental health of the mothers. And as I was talking with the women, I noticed that all of them had been sexually abused as children and physically abused. And then moving into adulthood, they've been in relationships of domestic violence and also had suffered later sexual assaults as well. And I started to really think, why are all the services focusing on the women? Understand that they might need support to move away from drug use or to make other changes in their lives that they want. But where are all the men? Where are the people who've abused them, either in the past or who are still currently abusing them? I mean, the drug use had been a response to the distress that they'd experienced from the sexual assaults. And, you know, it didn't just come from nowhere. And yet the women were being given really spoiled identities, such as drug user, bad mother, someone who's mentally ill. And mental illness in our society carries a stigma, so that's not just an empty label. And another theme that emerged was that not only were the women I was meeting, not only had they been sexually assaulted, but also for a lot of them, their mothers had also been sexually assaulted. And in some cases, their grandmothers also. So I guess I wanted to share with you a story of someone called Sarah. And she was sexually assaulted as a child, and then when she told her mother about it, initially her mum didn't believe her, and then later came to a point where she blamed Sarah for the assault and then physically assaulted her. So the meaning that Sarah took not only from the assault but the response that she got from her mum was that she must be a bad person. So then she went on a quest to become a better person, and she was exercising incessantly. She felt the need to restrict what she was eating, and then she was binging, and she called this bulimia. She also experienced a lot of depression, and both the bulimia and the depression then really isolated her from her friends, which made it even harder to be able to speak about what had happened to her. So Michael White tells us that it's the meaning that people make from the events of the abuse that can bring negative identity conclusions, and then actions against the self, like self-harm, eating disorders, suicidal thoughts and attempts on people's lives. The narrative practices that we would be using when working with people who've been subjected to abuse, they're the things that you're already using in other aspects of your work. So we're using double listening to really ensure that the person feels heard, that the abuse has been acknowledged. So we want to facilitate conversations that are really richly describing the effects of the abuse on the person's life. We're not rushing over that story. And then to separate the women from the problems they're experiencing and their negative identity conclusions, we're using practices of deconstruction about the messages in society, and also externalization. To develop a sense of agency in the lives of the women, I pay particular attention to the responses that they made at the time of the abuse. So this could be things like efforts to reduce the harm they experienced. It could be trying to find ways to escape. It could be trying to protect other people from the abuse. And it could be also it could also be responses that they're making to the ongoing effects of the abuse, such as trying to leave the house when fear is telling them not to, or getting on a bus when that just seems very scary. To articulate the skills that people have, the knowledges, their hopes, their dreams, their purposes in life. This is all trying to lead towards a preferred sense of self, and for that we'll be using reauthoring and the ideas of the absent but implicit. I'm not going to go into that a lot today, but I'll put some references at the end. To assist women to be able to hold on to the preferred identity, I find documentation really helpful, and also definitional ceremonies. So finding ways of having that preferred identity acknowledged, and it can also be supported through remembering conversations. This also helps finding other people to support the preferred identity, so that the person is not just on their own in trying to live life in this new way or have this different sense of themselves. So for the women, as I mentioned, there's been really serious consequences for them of the abuse, such as difficulty falling asleep, nightmares, self-harm, eating disorders, panic attacks, and things like suicidal thoughts and attempts on their lives. So for many of them, they have a variety of diagnoses, but the ones that are causing the most trouble in terms of sense of identity seem to be the label of borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder. So some of the meaning that the women are taking from having these labels are that I'm not able to have a normal relationship, I'm not lovable, they might think I'm not trustworthy, or I'm going to hurt people, or I do hurt people. So by externalizing and recognizing these problems of eating disorders, self-harm, suicidal thoughts as outcomes of abuse, we're moving it from a personal understanding to a political understanding, going from an internalized and pathologized description to acknowledgement of the political context of abuse. And for me, this has been really important because we're a generalist service that is drawing families for a range of issues, and yet 100% or virtually 100% of the women that I'm meeting with have been sexually and physically abused, mostly in childhood and also in adulthood. So this is a political issue, it is not a personal issue. And in deconstructing the messages of patriarchy, I'm hoping that the women are freer to choose how they live their lives and not just be controlled by messages that are insidiously imposed on them. Also, part of this work is recognising injustice. I guess as I think about their experiences and the responses they've had from family and from society and from the system, I think there's the injustice of the abuse, and then there's an additional injustice of not being believed or of being blamed for the abuse. And then there's another injustice in what is called the justice system, where most women and children don't feel like they have received any justice. And then to be labelled mentally ill, for me, that's another injustice again. So my outrage is really genuine, and when I express this to the women, I'm saying that it's not your fault, and you're not alone in this. Also, the mental illness and drug use is getting in the way for some of the women of parenting in the way that they really want to parent. They know their hopes and their values for life, and yet these things get in the way. And so this is another injustice for them, but also for their children. So I guess I wanted to speak for a moment about the politics of naming, because what injustices do the labels make invisible? And when someone has a label like borderline personality disorder, what effect does that have on workers when it goes ahead of them on the referral? What impact do the labels have on the way the women see themselves? And what's it like living under the scrutiny of mental health services and child protection services? When mental illness creates these labels create this stigma, it's also diverting attention away from the abuse, the impact of misogynistic practices on people, and from the influence of the patriarchal values that are sustaining of these sorts of occurrences of abuse. Thinking about Sarah's story, not only has she been subjected to abuse as a child, but also as an adult. She's been in relationships where there's been extreme verbal abuse and intimidation and threats made against her. And she's been impacted with the bulimia and the drug misuse, but also over time she's been diagnosed with bipolar, and this has had impacts on her life, and at one point ended up with hospitalisation from the effects of that on her. And her children were no longer able to live with her during that time and went to live with family where they were exposed to abusive situations. So the effects on Sarah's life have been very significant. And in our conversations, she's been able to connect what's happened to her, the abuse on her life, and the impact of what we've called patriarchy on her life and on the lives of other women. So we've also looked at her mother, in terms of her mother was subjected to abuse also as a child and has gone on to be diagnosed with a mental illness, as has her grandmother. We've discussed this idea of mental illness and what is this label. And so something that I prefer to think of and to use in my work is the idea that it's an expression of distress. When people are cutting or they're experiencing suicidal thoughts, I think of this as an expression of distress about what they've been subjected to. And so Sarah and I have discussed this and the idea that perhaps women's distress is discredited when it gets given the label of mental illness. So in thinking about these things, another practice that I've used is the idea of scaffolding the questions for concept development. And so with Sarah and some of the other women I meet with, they've left school quite early, so I don't just, say the word patriarchy. We talk about things I ask questions about what they've noticed in society, what messages they've come across. And so I've got a quote here from Sarah of her understanding of her experiences in society. She says, "My mum blamed me for being sexually assaulted and she bashed me. I don't blame her anymore because I know what she went through too. It doesn't make what she did to me right, but I understand it. Society and her abuser probably gave her the thoughts that the child is to blame for rape. She only did what she knew. It is abusive men who benefit when children are blamed." Sarah's also had other workers in her life before me, so I'm actually continuing on the work of some others. Another narrative practice that I use is documentation, and so with Sarah, we had a fairly, short conversation about when she first told me about the rape, and so I really wanted to spend a bit more time on further developing the second story of her responses at the time of the abuse and also to the ongoing effects. So I sent her a letter summarising what we'd talked about and then asking a few questions. I really want her to hold on to the new understandings that she'd made. And in thinking about the responses that she's made, she's pulled her life away from drug use. She has the children back with her now, and she's on the methadone program. At the moment, she's reducing her dose, and this is a real step for her in trying to move towards physical health. Like, she feels like it's really important for her physical health to get off the program, but also to be free of the daily requirements of going to the chemist and the impact that has on her in terms of attending appointments or looking for work, that sort of thing. So she's making very many responses to the effects on her life of the abuse. She's also reclaimed her life from bulimia. She's reclaimed her life from anger. And it was getting her doing things that didn't fit with her values. So even though she feels like the anger was justified, she decided that it wasn't really serving her very well. Along with that, she also has been on the journey of forgiveness for people, that she feels it's really important for her to do that. Other ways that she's reclaiming her life and moving in the direction that she wants is that she's offering her children a different life to the one that she was offered. She protects her children, she loves them, and she demonstrates that love every day. She's building a better life for them. And she said to me, in terms of when we were talking about the effects of bulimia and how that was connected to the abuse, I said, since the bulimia started as an effect of the abuse, does it mean that by standing up to the bulimia, you are standing up to the effects of the abuse? And she agreed about this, and she seemed really excited that not only was she standing up to the effects of abuse on her life, but that I was recognising that and acknowledging that. So I said, well, would you call this a reclaiming or a certain type of justice or something else? And Sarah said, both. I'm reclaiming my life and this is a type of justice. It's not the court type, but still I'm living my life the way I want. I can't go back to bulimia. I have a better life now, and I want to keep this better life for my kids. So in noticing these acts of resistance and the acts of reclaiming the women are making, and then documenting these, like I've written, whenever I hear these kinds of things, I write them down just for myself, and then also as a resource to be able to share with different women. It's really sustaining of me, and I feel like it's a step towards working the way that I want to work. It helps me to, well, I guess I do experience sadness at times from the stories that I hear, and to me that's still important because I want to always respond in a compassionate way and be moved by stories of injustice. But I don't want it to be overtaking me. I don't want the sadness to become so strong that I feel like I need to leave this type of work, because I feel that then that would be patriarchy winning again. So in thinking about why this work is sustaining, I guess I was thinking that it really engages my passion for justice, and it also connects me with my hope of making a difference in the lives of the people I meet with. And I guess I was thinking, I do know of some other workers who work in this way too, and it's really encouraging and sustaining of me when we're able to exchange emails or just let each other know that we're still there. And so I was going to invite you to perhaps leave a message on the forum after this video if you're interested, if you work in similar ways or you're interested in these ideas. Just perhaps leave a message, and then people can be encouraged by knowing that there's others out there. And I guess the last thing I was wanting to say was I'd like to encourage you to take notice of the actions that you're making to stand alongside women in protesting the injustice they experience, or in the experiences of other people who have been subjected to abuse. So these actions might be really small things, or they could be bigger things. It could be like if you're required to write a report for a government service, it might be using non-pathologising language as a stance against the stigma of labelling. It could be going with someone to the police to report what's happened to them. Or it could be being with someone in the decision that they make that perhaps they can't continue with the court process because it is having significant detrimental effects on their life. It could be advocating for people in the hospital system, or with child protection services, or it could simply be listening with compassion. So that's all I wanted to say, and thank you so much for joining me today.